Let's take a closer look at diminished intervals. Diminished intervals are either a perfect interval lowered by one half step or a major interval lowered by two half steps. Since the sound of two half steps is equal to the sound of one whole step, why don't we just use one whole step instead of two half steps? Let's examine this interval for the answer. This interval has a C on the bottom and a B double flat on top. It's a diminished seventh and uses these two notes. The top note is B double flat, which means we lower B by two half steps. B, B flat, B double flat, which is this note on the piano keyboard. This note looks and sounds like A, so why don't we just call it A? Since C is on the bottom of this interval, we'll use the C major scale. In the C major scale, A is scale degree 6. But this interval is a diminished seventh. C to A is some kind of a sixth. We need some kind of a seventh. In the C major scale, B is scale degree 7. Since this interval is labeled as a diminished seventh, we know the top note of this interval must be some kind of a B, not some kind of an A. In the C major scale, B is not one of the perfect intervals, so we know it's a major interval. Since it's a major interval, we'll lower it by two half steps to make it a diminished interval. B, B flat, B double flat. C on the bottom and some kind of B on top makes it a seventh. Lowering B by two half steps to B double flat makes this a diminished seventh. Let's look at another diminished interval. This interval has C on the bottom and A double flat on top. It's a diminished sixth and uses these two notes. The top note is A double flat, which means we've lowered A by two half steps. A flat, A double flat. This note looks and sounds like G. C's the bottom note, so looking at the C major scale, G is scale degree 5. But this interval is a diminished sixth. We need some kind of a sixth, which is A, not some kind of a fifth, which is G. In the C major scale, scale degree 6 is not one of the perfect intervals, so it's a major interval. Being a major interval lowered by two half steps, A flat, A double flat, makes this interval a diminished sixth. Any major interval lowered by two half steps becomes a diminished interval. Chromatic intervals can also be compound intervals. Compound intervals are intervals greater than 1 octave. These three intervals are all greater than 1 octave, and all three are also chromatic intervals. Let's label these three chromatic compound intervals. The first interval has a C on the bottom and this E flat on top. C is the bottom note, so we'll use the C major scale. Looking at the C major scale, there's E but no E flat. E flat is not in the C major scale, so we know it's a chromatic interval. Since the E in this interval has a flat in front of it, it's been lowered by one half step. In the key of C, this E is scale degree 10. A tenth is not one of the perfect intervals, so we know it's a major interval, and it's been lowered by one half step to E flat. Any major interval lowered by one half step becomes a minor interval. The name of this interval is a minor tenth. The next interval has F on the bottom and this D double flat on top. Since F is the bottom note, we'll use the F major scale. The top note, D double flat, does not appear in the F major scale, so we know it's a chromatic interval. The F major scale has this D natural, which is a major 13th, but since this D has a double flat in front of it, it's been lowered by 2 half steps. Any major interval lowered by 2 half steps becomes a diminished interval. The name of this interval is a diminished 13th. The last interval has G on the bottom and this C sharp on top. G on the bottom, G major scale. Looking at the G major scale, we see there's a C, but no C sharp. C sharp is not in the G major scale, so we know it's a chromatic interval. The G major scale has this C, which is a perfect 11th, but since this C has a sharp in front of it, it's been raised by 1 half step. Any perfect interval raised by 1 half step becomes an augmented interval. The name of this interval is an augmented 11th.